cut off my sister after she slept with my husband and told me to stay out of their business. Years later, they begged me to care for their son while she recovered from a car crash. My name is Lena, and I'm 36 years old. I used to believe that if I just lived with kindness, sincerity, and treated everyone around me with respect, then life would return that kindness. Maybe that was the last bit of innocence I held on to from a youth filled with hope. I grew up in a family of 3 siblings. My oldest brother, Chris, was calm, responsible, like a second father to us. I was the middle child, caught between 2 extremes: a brother who always had it together, and a younger sister named Jasmine, who wore her heart on her sleeve. Jasmine is 4 years younger than me. She's beautiful, lively, the kind of person who can light up any room just by walking in. I, on the other hand, was the one who excelled in school, landed a stable job early on, and was often called the pride of the family. But I never thought there was any competition between us. I loved Jasmine like she was a part of me. We grew up side by side, shared secrets, borrowed each other's clothes, covered up for one another's mistakes, and spent long nights whispering about dreams, about men, and about this thing people call true love. I met David when I was 25. He was the kind of man who made me feel seen, heard, and, most importantly, loved, without ever needing to pretend I was someone else. Tall, warm smile, worked in media, and had a sense of humor that could make me laugh even on my worst days. We dated for nearly 3 years before getting engaged. When David proposed to me on a beach trip, I cried tears of joy. I could see our future. I saw a little family. I saw Jasmine as my maid of honor, and Chris walking me down the aisle. It all seemed too perfect to ever fall apart. And truthfully, our wedding day was one of the most beautiful moments of my life. Jasmine was my maid of honor. She cried when she saw me in my dress, hugged me tightly, and whispered, "You deserve all the most wonderful things in life." And I believed her. I believed I was part of a family built on love. I believed love and trust were enough to keep anyone close. After the wedding, David and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. He worked at a small media firm while I was climbing the corporate ladder in finance. I was often busy, working late some nights, but I always made time for family on the weekends. Jasmine would still drop by, sometimes to cook with me, sometimes asking David to help her set up her new apartment. I never thought anything of it. In fact, I felt lucky that my husband and sister got along so well. They both loved action movies, shared a passion for rock music, hated raisins and cookies, small things, but comforting ones. It felt good not having to split my life into separate compartments. One for my husband, one for my sister. Everything felt intertwined, connected, peaceful. We had pizza nights, the 3 of us, watching Netflix together. Weekend mornings where David and Jasmine baked while I read a book nearby, occasionally teasing them. Jasmine would joke, "I wish David had a brother, so I could get a man like him too." And then she'd laugh out loud. I laughed too. I saw nothing unusual. I thought her words were just playful banter, the kind of thing a close sister might say without meaning anything by it. Because I trusted Jasmine. Trusted her so much that if someone had ever warned me to be cautious, I would have chuckled and said they were overthinking. Same with David. He never once gave me reason to doubt him. He loved me exactly how I needed to be loved, picking me up after overtime, remembering my big meetings and making coffee for me in the morning, sending little texts just to remind me to eat lunch. I used to think, so happiness really can be this simple. What I didn't know was that things had already begun to crack from the inside. From the lingering glances when I wasn't looking. From innocent texts that slowly turned into secrets. From a closeness that no longer felt harmless. But I didn't see it, because I was too busy trusting and loving. Things started to feel strange around the 5th year of our marriage, not in the obvious ways people often talk about. For David and me, everything seemed normal. Too normal. And maybe that's what made me blind to it all. He still came home on time, still remembered my mother's birthday, still talked about new coworkers and new projects at work. But there was something cold that started to settle between us. Not in what he did, but in his eyes. As if he was physically present, but his mind was somewhere I couldn't reach. I blame myself. Maybe I was just too busy. My job in finance rarely left space for rest. I often brought my laptop to bed, finishing reports late into the night. David would occasionally complain that I didn't spend enough time with him. And he wasn't wrong. But I truly believed I was doing it for us. For our apartment, our future, the stability we had always dreamed of. One night, after wrapping up a big presentation for an upcoming meeting, I stepped out of the office to find him. He wasn't in the bedroom. Not in the kitchen either. Then I noticed the living room light still on. He was sitting there talking on the phone. His voice was low, almost a whisper. He jumped when he saw me. "Who are you calling this late?" I asked. David smiled, quickly moving the phone behind his back like it was pure instinct. "Oh, no one. Just Jake from work. We've got a project on deadline." I nodded. I didn't press, but I remembered that moment. There was something different in his voice. It didn't sound like a work call. It sounded like he was hiding something. A few weeks later, Jasmine came by like she often did. She brought a basket of homemade pastries and said she wanted me to try a new recipe. She was all smiles, wrapping her arms around me from behind as I sliced apples for a salad. "You've lost weight," she said, half joking. "Too much stress at work?" And then she glanced at David. I laughed. I brushed it off. But there was something in the way she looked at him. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The way they avoided each other's gaze when I turned around. The way Jasmine joked about wishing David had a brother so she could have someone just like him. I used to think it was admiration. But looking back now, it was desire. Desire, dressed up in clever disguise. And then came the night everything fell apart. I was searching for my favorite black blazer, the one I planned to wear for a presentation at a seminar the following week. I turned my closet inside out but couldn't find it. I figured maybe I had accidentally hung it in David's section, like I sometimes did. I didn't find the blazer, but I did find a canvas bag. Tucked deep in the bottom drawer, something about it felt off. I opened it. Inside was women's lingerie. Not mine, not my style. And I knew that without a doubt. I picked up each piece, hands trembling, heart racing, and then I smelled it. That perfume. Familiar, undeniable. It was Jasmine's. I froze. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, a mistake. But my mind, finally waking up, started stitching together every red flag I had brushed aside. The looks, the nervous laughs, the perfectly timed absences, all of it scattered and subtle, suddenly forming a horrifying truth. I didn't sleep that night. I sat motionless on the couch clutching that bag. My mind was spinning, but I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just went numb, as if my body refused to accept what my eyes had seen. The next morning, while David was in the shower, I picked up his phone. I had never done that before. Not once in 5 years. I never felt the need to. But now, all the trust I had ever given him had been crushed beneath my feet. I knew the passcode. And it took less than a minute for everything to fall apart. Messages, photos, videos, sweet words, secret rendezvous. And the worst part? Jasmine had sent him a photo. She was wearing the exact nightgown I had gifted her last year. The caption read, "David likes this one." I felt like I was standing in the middle of a fire. Everything collapsing, everything burning, and I was the only one left standing, alone, scorched, and buried in the ashes of what once was called a family. I didn't wait until nightfall. I didn't wait to calm down. I called Jasmine. She was nearby, and within minutes she was at my house. David had just come home. They stood in front of me, together. I didn't yell. I simply held out my phone, opened the conversation, and placed the canvas bag in front of them. And then, Jasmine looked at me. No shame, no guilt. She said, "You should mind your own business. This has nothing to do with you." David stood beside her, silent. No excuses, no apologies. He just stood there, as if he wasn't the man I once called my husband. That moment was when I understood. I had lost them, both of them. And the scariest part? They didn't even think they were wrong. I used to believe that if I were ever betrayed, the most painful part would be the truth itself. But I was wrong. The part that took my breath away was how they looked at me. So calm, so unbothered, as if I was the one intruding on their personal life, not the woman they had both stabbed in the back. No one said sorry. No one denied anything. No one regretted it. There was only me standing there, phone still lit with their tender little messages, feeling like a stranger in the life I once called mine. I didn't cry. I didn't scream like the movies. The pain came like an undertow. Quiet, relentless, tearing me apart from the inside out. Like someone squeezing the air from my lungs with every breath I tried to take. I left without a word. I packed David's things. No smashing, no blaming. I just wanted to reclaim the space that once made me feel safe. To start over. Alone. Everything moved quickly after that. I filed for divorce. He didn't protest, didn't fight, didn't ask for anything. The apartment, the assets, even the wedding gifts. I kept them all. Not out of spite, but because David no longer cared. It was as if I had served my purpose, and now he was moving on to his next chapter. With Jasmine. I didn't tell anyone the full story. When my mother asked why David and I had split, I simply said, we weren't right for each other anymore. I didn't want to hear the usual. Everyone makes mistakes. Forgive your sister. Blood is thicker than water. I didn't need to be comforted. I needed peace. The only person who knew everything was Chris, my brother. He didn't say much. He just sat next to me on the old sofa, letting me rest my head on his shoulder as I cried. It was the only time I cried after learning the truth. And it was also the last. After the divorce, I cut all contact with both of them. Blocked their numbers, social media, email. I even changed my commute just to avoid accidentally seeing them in this city. From that point on, Jasmine stopped showing up at family gatherings. My mother tried to rebuild the connection, but no one in the family had the energy to pretend like nothing had happened. I started therapy. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted to understand how I could be hurt so deeply. I wanted to learn how to trust myself again, and forgive myself for trusting them too much. I redecorated the apartment, changed the curtains, painted the living room, burned the old wedding gifts on a rainy night like one last goodbye. Those small acts didn't change the past. But little by little, they helped me breathe again. 3 years passed. I lived peacefully. No love, no bitterness. Just me, strong enough to no longer fear anyone who might hurt me. Until one afternoon, when my phone rang. The phone rang 3 times before it went silent. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. No name saved. No hint of who might be on the other end. My first instinct was to ignore it. For the past 3 years, I had trained myself not to react to anything that fell outside my carefully guarded peace. But for some reason, this time, I pressed accept. Within seconds, the voice came through. Dry, tired, and hauntingly familiar. It was David. I didn't say a word. Something tightened in my chest, but I stayed just clear-headed enough not to drown in it. He didn't circle around, didn't apologize, didn't say, I know I shouldn't be calling. He just started talking, as if updating an old acquaintance. Jasmine had been in a car accident. A serious collision on the highway. Both legs broken. Her right arm shattered. She couldn't sit up. She couldn't take care of herself. And they had a son. A 2-year-old boy. Restless, barely able to speak, but already running around the house and waking up screaming from nightmares. They needed someone to help take care of him. David said he couldn't do it all. Work, hospital, a toddler. Everything was falling apart at once. They had called friends. Everyone was busy. They called their parents. Got turned down. They'd tried asking family. And I was the only one left. That's what he said. I listened. But my heart didn't move like it used to. In that moment, everything came back. Crystal clear. 3 years ago, I had stood in front of the 2 people I trusted most, and they had looked at me with empty eyes. They'd pushed me out of their lives with one cold sentence. "This has nothing to do with you." They had said my name like I was an inconvenience. They had cast me aside like a shadow. And now, they wanted to pull me back. As if I were the only lifeline they had left. There was a long silence. A second that stretched like an eternity. I didn't even realize how hard I was gripping the phone. My hand numb, slick with sweat. Not from pity, but because a small part of me, just a sliver, still remembered what it felt like to be a sister, to be a wife, to be a woman with a heart. I took a deep breath. And then, with a voice as soft as air but sharp as a blade, I answered. I didn't repeat the exact words they once threw at me. But I made him understand. With the same ruthless silence they had once used on me. That I would never step back into that nightmare again. I said no. Calmly. No yelling. No tears. No accusations. Just a final line. Clear. Unshakable. And then I hung up. No waiting for a reaction. No listening for a response. No goodbye. I stared at the now dark screen. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I had reclaimed control over my life. I had waited for this moment. Not for revenge, but for confirmation. Confirmation that I was no longer the broken woman they left behind. That I had climbed out of the quicksand of toxic love and family ties. And I would never go back. I thought that after that call, I would feel relief. That I would sit on my couch, pour myself a glass of wine, turn on an old playlist, and smile with quiet satisfaction. But I didn't. That feeling never came. What came first was emptiness. Not the kind that makes you feel lost, but the kind that settles after a long, brutal war inside yourself. I had said no. I had done what was right for me. But was it absolutely right? I stood at the window, watching the sunset cast gold across the rooftops in the distance. And in my mind, I saw the face of a child I'd never met. A 2-year-old boy, too young to understand betrayal. Too innocent to know what was right or wrong. A little soul born from 2 people who had dragged me through hell. But who, himself, was blameless. I didn't know if he had Jasmine's eyes, or David's curly hair. I'd never seen a picture, never even wondered. But that night, lying in bed, I found myself imagining round eyes wide with confusion. A tiny mouth whispering, "Mama," or "Dada," and no one answering. My chest tightened. I didn't cry, but I couldn't sleep. The next day, my mother called. For the first time in almost 6 months, she reached out. I looked at the screen as it lit up. Then, let it go dark. I didn't have the strength to answer. Minutes later, a message arrived. Just one line. "Can you just let it go? Jasmine is still your sister, and her child is still your blood." I didn't reply, but inside I wavered. I knew my mother didn't understand. Maybe she didn't want to. To her, Jasmine and I were both her daughters. Right or wrong didn't matter. Eventually, we were supposed to move on, but I didn't want to move on. You can't erase 5 years of betrayal with one accident and a few desperate pleas. That afternoon, I stepped out of my silence. I went for a walk in the park, headphones in, playing old songs. I watched the kids play on the slide. One of them fell, burst into tears. His mother rushed over, picked him up, held him close. I turned away. There was a tightness in my throat I couldn't explain. When I got home, I called Chris. He picked up almost immediately. I didn't beat around the bush. I asked, "Do you know what happened?" He was quiet for a moment, then said yes. He'd heard from Mom, but he hadn't reached out to me because he knew I needed time. I asked, "If it were you, would you help them?" Chris let out a long, heavy sigh. He said he didn't know, because logic said no. But the heart doesn't always follow reason. I knew exactly what he meant. I had felt it too. Some wounds never heal, but there's a part of us that still struggles to turn away completely from those we once called family. I didn't tell him that I had already said no. I didn't mention the phone call with David. I just said, "Whatever you choose to do, I won't stop you. But me, I'm not ready." Chris understood. He didn't judge. He told me that not helping doesn't make someone cruel. That choosing distance can be a way of saving yourself from being dragged back into pain again. And I was grateful for that. The next 3 days passed without any new calls. No one knocked on my door. No texts from my mother. Life returned to what it had been. But I was no longer the same. That night, I spent hours journaling. I poured every feeling I had onto the page. Anger, exhaustion, guilt, even a quiet flicker of compassion for an innocent child. I wasn't writing to find answers. I was writing to hear myself more clearly. And after hours of wrestling with my thoughts, I realized something. I wasn't wrong to say no. But I also wasn't wrong to feel hurt about it. Compassion doesn't require sacrifice. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting people hurt you again. I can care about their child. I can wish Jasmine recovery. But that doesn't mean I have to carry the weight of consequences for people who once destroyed me without a second thought. I'm not trying to play the role of the good one. I just want to live in peace. A peace I fought long and hard to earn. Almost 2 weeks passed since that phone call. I stopped dreaming about Jasmine's face. Stopped waking in the middle of the night with that vague, aching guilt. My mind slowly returned to balance. To a place where I was living in the present, no longer held hostage by the fragments of my past. Chris called again one weekday afternoon while I was working at my favorite coffee shop. He told me he had finally texted Jasmine. Not because he had forgiven her, but because of the child. I listened quietly. He didn't go into details, just said that, if possible, he'd send a little money each month. Enough to hire part-time childcare or help with hospital bills. He didn't want her to hit rock bottom, but he had no intention of rebuilding any relationship. I nodded. I didn't stop him. Didn't encourage him either. That was his choice, and I respected that. I only said one thing. I don't want to know anything else. But if the boy ever truly needs something no one else can provide, tell me. Just once. No pressure. But you can tell me. Chris understood. He didn't say anything more. Since that day, I haven't received a single message from David, Jasmine, or my mother. It was as if someone had flipped a switch to silence. No one questioned me. No one reached out. And I didn't reach for anyone. I went back to work. Started spending more time with myself. Picked up the books I once left unfinished. Went to the movies alone on weekend nights. Signed up for a yoga class. Planted new greenery on my balcony. Little things, insignificant to others. But to me, they marked the beginning of a new chapter. There were times I saw photos of Jasmine pop up in mutual friends' feeds. Her face pale, eyes tired. But beside her, a chubby-cheeked child wrapped his tiny arms around her neck. I looked at the photo. I didn't hate her. I didn't feel sorry for her either. Just a strange kind of stillness. Like seeing someone who once passed through your life only to walk down a different path forever. I don't know if they still live in this city or moved elsewhere. And I don't care to find out. Because now I'm no longer standing at the crossroads between anger and pity. I've taken my own road. And they're not on it. One morning, I made myself a glass of iced coffee, opened the balcony door, and sat in the little wooden chair. The breeze caught my hair. The sun was rising, soft, gentle, warm. I looked down at the familiar street. Everything was the same, but I was different. I was no longer the woman who once begged for an explanation. No longer the sister drowning in betrayal. I was a woman who knew what she wanted, who knew what to hold on to, and what to let go of. A woman who understood that forgiveness isn't something we owe others, but a gift we give ourselves, so we're not chained to what once broke us. I didn't need justice from the outside, because real justice is when you can walk forward without ever looking back. And in that moment, I knew I had forgiven, not them, but myself, for loving the wrong people, for trusting too deeply, and still choosing to live with a whole, unbroken heart. Thank you for listening to her side of the story. This is my story. And maybe it's yours too. For anyone who's ever been betrayed, who once stood alone in what was supposed to be a family, and still survived. Not through revenge, but by making a choice to keep living, to live beautifully, and to live truly for themselves.